Hello and welcome to my channel In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and today I have another episode of Books and Coffee. Welcome to my periodically appearing episode of Books Are Like Coffee, where I take a type of genre or category of books and give you options and recommendations all across the spectrum, from what I call the instant coffee reads, which are super fun, easy, light, quick reads that don't require a lot of brain power to read, or just for fun, all the way up to the more esoteric sort of books that really require an interest in the subject matter at hand, or time on your hands, or more willingness to have to think more heavily. Maybe there's language you have to wade through, like archaic language or something. Anyway, everything in between. Today's topic is, as you probably know by the title of this video, epistolary novels, which are not everyone's cup of tea, and I get that. However, you may be surprised, I know I have been surprised, by what books are labeled epistolary, not realizing that they were considered epistolary. So what is an epistolary novel? The easiest definition is it's a novel or a book based largely on letters, not like alphabet letters, but written letters between two people or more. The letters are the framework of the book, but there can also be other substantiating documentation, like telegrams or emails nowadays, emails, texts, other documentation, or diary entries. Books that are composed largely of diary entries also often fall under the epistolary category. So I have recommendations of all kinds of different epistolary novels. Now, I personally really enjoy this genre. I think it's a fun approach to telling a story other than a straightforward narration. I really enjoy it. There are drawbacks though, because it really limits your perspective. And also, there's an inherent drawback in that when people write letters to one another, they only write so much, they don't write about every conversation they had. And even back, in the day when letter writing was much more common, and that's how people communicated with one another, and they wrote long, newsy letters to each other, they didn't necessarily recount every single conversation they had. They did not describe everything in detail, and depending on the person writing, it would not have been like very literary. And also, you don't get a complete story. Even when you read all of the letters between two people, you're not going to get a complete story of the things that happen in their life. It's just not. So there's already at the outset the understanding that an epistolary novel is going to stretch the boundaries of reality just a little bit. And it's fun to see how different authors compensate for that, how they flesh out their narration without sacrificing the realistic tone of the letters. Some flesh it out with additional documentation, some intersperse third-person narrative throughout, or some use diary entries, etc. A lot of different ways to handle it, and I just enjoy the creativity of it. So I like epistolary, but I also like first person. So chances are, if you don't like first person, you probably wouldn't like epistolary because they have similar drawbacks in a way. Anyway, to start with, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to begin with instant coffee. So instant coffee books are just fun, light reads, something to read in between when you're reading heavier things, or just for fun, or like beach reads kind of thing. I couldn't think of a lot in this category, but the first one I thought of, I don't have a physical copy of, is Authentically, Izzy by Basham, which is an exchange largely of emails and texts. And what I like about this one is the way that she makes it work in the format is the two people who are corresponding. Well, there's correspondence between they're kind of like cousins, and I think they're cousins, but they act more like siblings, a group of 3 people. And so they're emailing each other a lot, or like text threads with each other, that kind of thing. But the 2 primary characters in the story are corresponding because they have met on a dating app. And they are long distance from each other. So they're not anywhere near each other to meet each other until a good ways through the story. So it's very realistic in that sense. Actually, when I first met my husband, I met him in person initially, but then he went away to school. And so the first 9 months really of our relationship, we only saw each other once, and largely we communicated by email the first 3 to 4 months. Then we started to talk on the phone a lot, but we were still emailing as well. So that's very realistic. Like when you don't have any other form of communication happening, like the whole story can be sort of told. Plus it's fleshed out by Izzy's texts and emails to her cousins, where she's, you know, hashing out the things that she's going through and the things that she's worrying about, things that she's thinking about, etc., and getting feedback from them. So it's really funny. It's lighthearted. It's definitely a rom-com. It's getting some inspiration from other popular books and movies. So that's a really fun one. Then there's a series of spin-offs of, or kind of like retellings of Jane Austen's novels, which I really enjoy reading, what amounts to essentially Jane Austen fan fiction, because it's like she created such lovable characters that you really just want to know better, and you just want to imagine more about their lives. I do. Okay, I don't speak for everybody, but I do. And it's just fun to read what other people imagine about these characters, trying to get inside their heads, whatever. So quite a few people have attempted to do this by either writing in, like it's as if it's one of the characters' diaries or letters they are writing, correspondence. So one author, Amanda Grange, has written a series of epistolary novels based on Austen's books. And one I have not read, but I have, is Captain Wentworth's diary. So obviously based on Persuasion, but it's the diary of Captain Wentworth. And then Dear Mr. Darcy, which is obviously about Pride and Prejudice. Yeah, so I think in this one, he's, Mr. Darcy is writing several different people that he knew, like his family members, etc., and friends, Mr. Bean, whatever, writing them letters, and and I think there may be journal or diary entries in there also. I can't remember exactly. It's been a long time since I've read it. But anyway, it's a fun way of, you know, just pretending like you're getting to know Mr. Darcy a little bit more in the story. It's just a fun way to imagine more about those characters. And then another one that I read on Kindle, so I don't have a hard copy of it, is not actually a story, but it's a fun book that I think every book lover would enjoy. Novel Advice, Practical Wisdom for Your Favorite Literary Characters. And I did not write down the author's name, but I'll put a picture up there. And basically, so it's like an Aunt Agony advice column sort of thing, but the person writing the advice is Aunt Antigone, and the people who are writing her are all characters in well-known classic and modern classic novels. And so sometimes it's hilarious, sometimes you want to laugh out loud, sometimes it's, you know, a little bit heartwarming with the advice that she gives and the encouragement that she gives to these characters who are writing her. And it was always very interesting to me, even when it was characters from a book that I was not super familiar with. I added a few books to my TBR after reading it, and I was interested in some others. And there were quite a few also in there that I had read and was familiar with their stories. So that's just a fun read for a book lover. So if you like books, and I'm assuming you do, and you haven't read that one yet, go ahead and read it and tell me what you think. So those are our easy fun reads. Moving on to the dessert latte. These also are fun reads, but a little bit longer, a little bit more real topics, may take more time to read, or a little bit more thought. And this one I have, it's another Austen retelling, but what I like about this one, it was written by, not a descendant of Austen, because she didn't have any, but I think a descendant of her brother, maybe her older brother James. Joan Austen-Leigh, I think is her name. Anyway, so she wrote it, and she may have written more than one. I don't know if I've read all that she's written, but she wrote this one, and it was pretty good. You know, it was like Jane Austen fan fiction. It was called A Visit to Highbury. And what was unique about the perspective of this one that I liked was that it was Mrs. Goddard emailing sister-in-law, I think it was. And Mrs. Goddard was the schoolmistress of the school where Harriet Smith attended. And Harriet Smith was Emma's friend that she was trying to marry up higher. Failed at that, failed at many things, in fact. But in the end, Emma married Mr. Knightley. But this is told from kind of like a little bit of a distance removed perspective of Harriet Smith's schoolmistress at her school. So that was a fun read and interesting, and also written in an epistolary style throughout. Another one, I'm sure you've heard of this, you may have read it already, and that is Dear Daddy Longlegs by Jean Webster, which is just fun. It's just a fun, it's a classic, but it's short. There's not a lot to it. It's just these letters between an orphan girl and her benefactor, and his condition of her scholarship money basically is that she write him on a regular basis to update him of her progress. And she just has such a charming personality. And she's imagining, you know, this older, very tall gentleman. That's why she calls him Dear Daddy Longlegs. But actually, he's not that much older than her. He's a young man. And over the course of the time, unexpectedly, the two end up falling in love, and they end up meeting in person, although at first she doesn't know that this is the person that she has been corresponding with. So it's really just a fun story. It's a great classic. If you haven't read it yet, definitely get your hands on that and read that one. That's one of my favorites, and I would really like to reread it. Actually, I need to get a physical copy of it because I don't currently have one. Another one, you may be surprised. This may be one of the ones you'd be like, oh, that's an epistolary novel? Yes, indeed. This is Anne of Windy Poplars by Lucy Maud Montgomery. And it is, of course, part of the Anne series. And it's not fully epistolary. There is some third-person narrative in here also. But largely, this book exists of an exchange of letters between Anne and Gilbert. I think it's mostly the letters Anne wrote to Gilbert and not vice versa. Well, she is the principal of high school in the town of Summerside. And Gilbert is at school, I think medical school. And so they are, I believe that they are engaged by this point, but they are exchanging letters, and it spans a few years, I think. So this is the next, I'm slowly working my way through rereading this series. This is the next that I'm going to reread. So it's not fresh in my memory, but I want to read this one soon. And I do remember all the letters. Like, I remember there being a lot of letters in this book. So I'm looking forward to rereading this one, probably this year at some point, I hope, anyway. And that is my dessert latte category. So cappuccino, we are starting to get into the real deal here, people. When it comes to coffee, and when it comes to books, what I mean by this is these are just books that they're great books. They're solid books. They are loved by many people for a reason, or they should be, but they're not going to tax you too much or require too much of you. Just a general level of enjoyment and involvement and interest in the story. In this particular video, what kind of was the deciding factor for me between putting them in this category as opposed to the dessert latte category, which came previously, was the topics and the themes covered in the books. Because these ones, they're not difficult to read necessarily in their style or anything like that. They just deal with heavier topics. They're not necessarily like romances or heartwarming stories or just, you know, delightful stories. These deal with a lot of heavier topics, namely war especially, and grieving and that sort of thing. So they're not all sweet and sugary by any means, but they are easy to read, and I think that most people would really enjoy these books. They have a pretty broad spectrum of enjoyment. So the first one I want to mention is Things We Didn't Say by Amy Lynn Green, which is her debut novel. And it is about a woman who is sent to censor letters in a prison camp in America during World War II. So it has mostly letters, but then there's I think there may be newspaper articles and telegrams and official documentation, court documents, etc. And so there's more than just letters. The story gets really fleshed out in that way. And it really deals with some heavy things. It deals with things about censorship during wartime. It deals with the U.S. treatment of prisoners of war. It deals with the topic of how the United States handled like the Japanese in that lived in the United States during World War II. A lot of things it deals with. It's not a light, easy read in that sense. There are a lot of heavy themes dealt with here, but it's very good and ultimately has a positive ending. Another one that I read most recently, and I know other people who have read it have really enjoyed it, and that was Marmee by Sarah Miller, which is the story of Little Women, but based from Marmee's perspective, but it's told through her diary entries. So she's writing in her journal, and I don't think it goes through every single scene that we see in Little Women. And it does add some characters and some storylines for Marmee that are outside of the scope of Little Women, but don't take away from the actual story that Louisa May Alcott was telling in Little Women. And I just really, really, really loved reading about the story of the girls from the mother's perspective. And it made me cry on more than one occasion. So definitely not like a sweet and fluffy read. And the author did an excellent job of capturing Marmee's voice and her heart and her perspective on things as a mother, and her worries for her children and her concerns for her children and her love for her children and for her husband, all of that for her husband as well. Very well written book. The same author wrote a book about Caroline Ingalls, Ma of Little House on the Prairie, which I also really liked, but it is not epistolary, I don't think, anyway. And then we have Dear Mr. Knightley by Catherine Ray, which I believe is also her debut novel, and I'm not sure that it's written 100% in epistolary. It's been a long time since I read it. I think it may be fleshed out with a little bit of third-person narrative. And again, this one made me cry more than once. And the girl in the story goes through some hard things. I think that Catherine Ray was inspired by Dear Daddy Longlegs, but it doesn't have the almost jovial feel that Dear Daddy Longlegs has. It has a different storyline that is dealing with heavier things, and possibly more realistic for the life of an orphan girl who doesn't have any support system. So I read that one many years ago, but I remember crying very heavily when I read it. I really enjoyed reading it. Another one that I read most recently is Last Christmas in Paris by Hazel Gaynor and Heather Webb, I believe. And that one is set during World War I, between a soldier who goes off to war. Primarily, the letters are between a soldier who goes off to war and his childhood friend, who is a girl who is left back in England. And you get both of their perspectives as we go through the war. And it's a little bit detached from the actual war because they're writing each other, and it's like you're not in the action, which is, what many people feel like is a drawback of the epistolary style. But, and then there are a few times in the story when they meet, and so you kind of get like quick little flashbacks to the time that they met, like they mention things that they did or things that happened, but you don't really get a full picture of everything that went on in the brief periods of time when he was on leave or whatever, where they happened to meet and be in person, so they weren't exchanging letters. But it does get a little bit fleshed out by the fact that she's emailing her friend as well, and you get a different perspective because she'll tell her friend things that she's not telling this guy that she's writing. And anyway, it is really very well done. But again, it deals with heavy things. The guy in the story, he goes through some pretty serious depression. He's not like a soldier kind of guy. He's like an academic, literary sort of person, and he's thrust into World War I, and he goes there bravely, but wasn't really prepared for everything that happened to him there, and slides into a pretty serious depression, and in fact is sent to Scotland to recover at an asylum for a while before he is able to go back to the war. And so he doesn't have it's not an easy read. There are heavy things in the story, but ultimately it does end well. That one does have like a sort of a dual timeline in a way that's not epistolary, in where the guy in the story, he is an older man at the end of his life, and he's looking back and he's reading the letters that they wrote and kind of like reliving their relationship. And so interspersed between the letters, there are some there's some third person narration that breaks up the story and is looking back and at the life that he and this woman had together. So it's really well told. I enjoyed that a lot. So that is my cappuccino category. And now we have Americano, which these are just, these are just classic, straight up good coffee, made with espresso and hot water and maybe a splash of half and half. But really just really good books that have stood the test of time, but may require a little more effort for you to enjoy. May be something you might not seek out just for a casual read if you didn't have a reason to hook your interest in these books. So the first one is, now this is quite a popular one, so this could maybe have gone in the previous category, but that is the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. I put it in this category because it kind of has become more of a classic and very well known. I mean, it's I don't think anyone would define it as a classic, but it certainly has maintained its popularity for 10 to 15 years, I guess. Many people really enjoyed this book, and the movie was pretty good that came out about it. The book was better. So this one is told entirely through letters and telegrams, and is about World War II and the Guernsey Islands in World War II and things that happened there. And just really, just a really good story on every level of the German occupation of the Guernsey Islands, of the girl's relationship with a guy, and her questioning about, her life and her direction in life, and love, and her, anyway, in a sense, sort of a bit of a coming of age, although she's adult at the beginning of this story, but really finding her way, I guess, through her time on the Guernsey Islands. And anyway, so this was a very good book that I enjoyed. Then I have the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, which currently Books and Jams is reading a book club with this, which I would love to join in because I really love Screwtape Letters, but I don't think that I have time this month to read it. But I read it many years ago. It's actually not that long. It is about letters between a demon and his uncle. And his uncle is kind of like advising him or training him, so to speak, via the written letter about how to tempt his assigned human. It's just very eye-opening to, I mean, of course, this is all from C.S. Lewis's imagination, but it's based on, his understanding from scripture and from wisdom as, someone who has lived as a believer in a struggle with temptation, etc. It's very thought-provoking and eye-opening about the ways that we are tempted and drawn away from the truth of scripture and what we know to be true, and how the devil can use different things in our lives to just to destroy us, really. I mean, that's ultimately his goal, is he does not want us to thrive. So this was a very good book that I really enjoyed. I've enjoyed all of C.S. Lewis's fiction that I've read, and that one was excellent. Another one is The Diary of Anne Frank, which many people have read. I have to be honest, I've only read it once. I may have read it twice, but I wasn't really all that impressed with the girl, Anne Frank, just to be perfectly honest. Maybe I should revisit now. Some time has passed, and I might not be so judgy as I was when I read it before, and I may come with a different takeaway. But honestly, I didn't really love Anne Frank as a person. And, she's a young girl when she's writing this, like a teenager, when she's writing this. and the things are happening to her family and everything. And I think it's a very, very interesting to have her perspective at that time in history and in that place. And I think it's definitely worth reading just for that reason alone. But, you know, she was a teenage girl, and not a fully mature teenage girl either, for that matter. But it is definitely something that, it's an important book that everybody should read. And then this one, I actually had forgotten that this was an epistolary novel. It didn't strike me as such because of the way that it's formatted. This is where authors may perhaps take liberties with the concept of epistolary and kind of like stretch that a little bit. But I'm talking about The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte, which is here, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. And this one is one of my favorite Bronte books. It may be my favorite. I don't know. I need to reread it and really decide if it is as I remember it being my favorite. I really enjoyed this story that Anne Bronte wrote. And it's very emotional and also deals with some pretty heavy topics. And a marriage that has gone awry for a variety of reasons, and a woman escaping from that marriage, and then the things that happened to her. So anyway, really good book. Technically, it's a letter interspersed with some, I think, some diary entries and some other things. But I mean, I don't know anybody who ever wrote letters like that, but yeah, it's still good. It's a good story. So those are my Americano recommendations. So for Black Coffee, we are getting more into more and more books that you're going to have to want a reason to read them, probably, besides just the fact that they are good books that have been well loved by many people, and or they are very important books that we should all read at some point, if we can. These ones probably, you know, you can live a long and happy life without reading them, in my opinion, most of them. So, however, if they interest you and if you have a particular reason for wanting to read them, you would probably get a lot out of them and enjoy them. The first one, I don't know, but I'm just going to mention this one, and that is I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith, which was written as like diary entries by a teenage girl. I guess I just don't like diary entries by teenage girls. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's what it is. I mean, my own diary entries when I was a teenage girl, I wouldn't want anybody to read them, that's for sure. Anyway, I Capture the Castle. I just... characters were weird. The story was weird. The things that happened were weird. If I can be frank, I thought, that was stupid. Why did I just read it? But clearly, that's only because I am just missing out on the amazing greatness that is in that book, because there are plenty other people who love it and highly recommend the book. So your mileage might vary. You may love it where I hated it, so I'm mentioning it. I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. Read it and tell me. If you have read it, tell me. Did you love it? Or do you agree with my opinion that it was, you know, stupid? And then we have one that I do want to read, but more for curiosity's sake. I don't think I'm necessarily going to love it as a story based on what I've heard about it. Pamela by Samuel Richardson. I think this is one that didn't really, the subject matter and the way that it was handled probably didn't survive its era, based on what I have heard about it. Not actually read it. But I think it is worthwhile reading. It is, I believe, one of the first epistolary novels, so it kind of set that genre in motion. So it's worth it from a literary perspective. It's worth it from a historical perspective. And so for those reasons, I'm interested in reading it. And I do want to read it eventually, but I feel like it's going to take a little bit of time and it's going to require mental energy. So it's a book that I have to be prepared to read, if that makes sense, and have a reason to read. So one of these days I will fit it into, you know, some kind of reading challenge and make myself read this book. especially now that I have a copy of it. Another one is The Diary of Fanny Burney. I happen to like diaries and memoirs of people, particularly if I have a reason to be interested in their life. Fanny Burney, I was interested in reading this one because she was one of Jane Austen's favorite authors. Jane Austen enjoyed her books, and I read her book, Evelina, which I'll talk about in a second, but I was just curious when I read that, she had published diaries. Well, someone published them for her. I don't know that she published them. I was just curious because it just seemed like she lived an interesting life. And for a time, she was a lady in waiting for, which queen was that? Charlotte, who was the wife of George III, who was kind of like crazy King George. And so she has in her diary eyewitness accounts of his bouts of madness and what the doctors did to treat it, and how, it affected everybody in the court and in the country. So very interesting fly on the wall perspective of a very unique time in history. And she knew a lot of famous people, like reading her diaries, like reading a who's who of England at that time. And she also was a published author who was very popular during her lifetime. So it's a very interesting read as far as diaries go. So now these are easy to read, but most people don't read the juvenilia of an author unless they are, big fans of that author, like serious fans. So like you're probably not going to pick up the Bronte's juvenilia or the Austen juvenilia unless you really are a huge Austen fan and you've read all of her novels and you want more. So that's why I put them in this category. Not that they're so difficult to read. Well, I haven't read this one. This is Lady Susan, is the one I want to mention here, is an unfinished novel by, was it unfinished actually? Yeah, I don't know if it was unfinished or it was one that she wrote before. But anyways, Lady Susan is one of her shorter epistolary stories that she wrote mostly for her family's amusement. And then these are definitely ones that she wrote as a teenager, and she wrote for her family just to enjoy. Love and Friendship is the first one, and they're all like super short, like 25 pages or something. Leslie Castle, The History of England, A Collection of Letters, and The Three Sisters. So these are just fun. I mean, Jane Austen was a funny person. I would have loved to have met her in person. I hope, when we all get to heaven, that I can just sit and listen to her talk and laugh all day long, because I think she would just be so hysterical. Anyway, her wit and coupled with her wry wisdom, I love her perspective. And even when she was a teenager, like, it's just so funny, these books, and also a little bit zany. So she was clearly not trying to write stories that would have, like mass appeal to a reading public. She was just amusing herself and with these stories, and they're just funny. So this is Love and Friendship and Other Early Works by Jane Austen. And as I mentioned, by Fanny Burney, we have the book Evelina, which is also epistolary. It tells the story of Evelina. Jane Austen, this was a book that Jane Austen read and enjoyed. And as a matter of fact, Jane Austen was inspired initially when she wrote her novels. Like, all her juvenilia are written as epistolary books. And originally when she wrote her novels, she wrote them in epistolary. But I think that she realized the drawbacks of that style. And so then she changed it to more of a third person omniscient kind of narrative, and which worked a lot better, I think. But she included still a lot of the letters. So you have probably noticed that there are many key important letters in her books, particularly in Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion. And it really plays a key part in all of her stories. She was more than likely inspired by books like Pamela and Evelina by Fanny Burney. So Evelina, I have read, and it is pretty funny. It's almost like, if I'm remembering correctly, it's almost like a little bit slapstick. The humor is like a little bit slapstick, and definitely a little bit more zany than, like, Jane Austen's wit is like very, very sparkling wit. What I remember from Evelina was more of, I don't know, it's kind of hard to describe, but more along like the slapstick kind of funny, like zany situations, sort of funny, not necessarily just, elegant sparkling wit in, polite society kind of conversation, sort of funny. if I remember correctly. It has been a few years, and I definitely, I have more books by Fanny Burney that I want to read. And I also want to read that one again, just so I can get a better grip on my memory of exactly how it goes. But I do remember enjoying it very much, especially if you are an Austen fan and you're always looking for more things Austen-ish. This is a degree or two removed from Austen, but still very interesting. And we have one more category today. And this is just straight up espresso. You have to truly love coffee in order to drink just straight up espresso, and you really need that charge. So these books that I am going to mention today are definitely for people who have more of an esoteric taste or a highly developed taste for something in particular. So first of all, if you like Russian history, or if you like real life epic sort of romance stories, you will like this one, which I have mentioned before on this channel, A Lifelong Passion, which is collected letters of Nicholas and Alexandria, the last Tsar and Tsarina of Russia. And it's letters between them to each other, but also letters to various family members, diary entries. It's just fascinating, and it walks through their history of you know, their days together that started out so well but then ended horribly, and it's fleshed out with other documentation and notes so that you can kind of be following their whole entire story as you go along. Really just very well done. It's a chunker. It took me a long time to read it when I read it many years ago, but I enjoyed every moment, and I really loved reading their letters to each other and the letters of their family members. So if you are a fan of Russian history, or even just their history, because, you know, by virtue of, you know, much that has been made of the story of Anastasia, their daughter, whether or not she survived, which is highly improbable, extremely unlikely that she did, but people like to dream about that. But if you want to read about their family, it's just very interesting. And if, like me, you are a huge Jane Austen fan and you read everything that she's read, including her Juvenilia, and you still want more, then you can read her letters. Now, her sister got rid of many of her letters and heavily censored them. So, but there is enough here that we can really just get a feel for Jane Austen's personality and who she was and what she valued, and how much she was loved by her family, and how much she loved her family, all her siblings and her parents and everything. So it's really good. And this edition that I read by Deirdre LaFay had very helpful directories of the people that are mentioned or correspondence of Austen in this book, and also like places that she refers to and incidents that she refers to if it's not clear from the context, like it gives you more information. And it also has detailed information about like where the letters came from and like their provenance or whatever. So actually only half of the book is the actual letters. The other half is all of the footnotes and the directories and guides and everything. So it's really, I really enjoyed reading those, and sometimes Austen would just make me laugh out loud. So I am also looking forward to, I got this on Pango Books last fall, but I haven't read it yet, but I really want to. This is the Brontes, A Life in Letters. So this is letters exchanged among the Bronte family with each other and with other people, with their friends and with other entities, and it just goes through their life. And so I am really interested in reading this one. Looking forward to that one. So that wraps up my epistolary books are like coffee edition. I know there are so many more epistolary novels, some of which I have read, some of which I have not, some of which I definitely 100% want to. So I could make a whole other video about this, and I may in another year or two when I have a few more to recommend to you that I've actually read. So there could be totally more. So in the comments below, let me know if there are other epistolary novels that you have read that you really enjoyed that you think other people would also like, or that you think I would particularly like. And let me know your thoughts about these ones that I mentioned. Have you read them? Any of them? Did you like them? Do you agree with my categorization of them? Would you put them in a different spot? Just for people watching to get really good recommendations for books they might be interested in. And I'll talk to you later next time. Bye.